All right, we're ready to go. Okay, good evening. The hour being 7:03 PM on Monday, July 8th, 2024. I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Niramatsu?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bridget. We have two items up today on the Committee of the Whole. The first is a discussion and a review of a proposed vacant building ordinance and property registration for all commercial and residential buildings. As the board has a very detailed memo from our Community Development Director, Libby Popovic, regarding what the reason for this recommendation is, how it came about, but I am going to ask Libby to make a presentation to the board and the audience about this. So, Libby?
Thank you. So if it pleases the board. So the purpose is discussing the potential of a property registration and vacant building ordinance here in the Village of Brookfield. At the current time, we don't have any effective tracking mechanism that exists for staff to internally be able to evaluate and review vacant properties, both commercial and residential ones. What I've used that we do have accessible is the zero water usage spreadsheet that we received from Public Works. And this one's as of the beginning of June 1st. We use that to see who hasn't been using water within the last 3 weeks as kind of a starting point for the assessment. And then also reviewing some of the files with property maintenance, we determined that there's probably about 75 known vacant properties and probably 90 plus total between commercial and residential. So what we're looking for is to get some accurate data that we would need to create an internal system to be able to evaluate vacant properties and then combat the vacant properties that exist for both residential and commercial. One of the reasons that property registration and vacant building ordinances exist in certain municipalities is, one, for efficient property maintenance. It allows the village to reduce some type of blight in certain communities, in certain areas, increase the exterior appearance, and do effective lawn care when there's a need. It also increases safety and security. It decreases crime, vandalism, fire hazards. It allows us to enforce regulations and certain standards in the village. It enhances neighborhood stability. So certain properties, the structural integrity of the neighborhoods is increased, thereby it increases property values and the overall community pride in the buildings. And then we also have a component of revenue generation for these, although the exact dollar amount for that is unknown. Additional benefits are reliable data collection. Like I said, right now we have two. One is just kind of looking through the notices of violation, kind of trying to decide how many we have just from looking at the files and going 2 years back, and one is just from lack of water usage. So we need something better that's more reliable and a metric that actually makes sense for community development and staff to be able to look at that. Another benefit is owner accountability, bringing owners to account for the properties and the vacant properties, encouraging them to rehabilitate them, to sell them, to fix them, to rent them, and so forth. It promotes public health. This is a very important one because it prevents vermin infestations that we have to deal with, illegal dumping that occurs, garbage that's thrown out, flammable materials that might exist that need to be removed from the property. So promoting public health is a major component of it. And then the last but not least is increasing economic development across the board. It allows us to mitigate some of the negative impacts that some of these properties, specifically vacant commercial properties, create within the neighborhood and within the village. Any questions at this time?
So, we proposed ordinance would put a burden on the property owner to somehow come forward and register or acknowledge that the property is vacant?
Correct.
And as I assume, as always, this is, we're familiar with this being done in other towns. How well does that work? I'm sure we could all picture some of these vacant buildings and some of these people have just picked up and left or didn't comply with ordinances and things in place. Is there a pretty high compliance rate with people saying, okay, my building's vacant, I'm going to register? Or what, is there penalties for not registering, I assume?
Certainly. Yeah, there are penalties, and those are recommended as well. Within the communities that are listed here with North Riverside, Berwyn, Cicero, Maywood, Broadview, Forest Park, Lyons, and what is that, Elgin. It's a process to follow up with it, so this isn't a quick process where you implement it and then everyone rushes to the counter and registers and then takes care of the buildings. But this allows us a metric to start tracking it.
Sure.
So my understanding from dealing with 3 of these municipalities, it has brought the overall vacancy down a certain amount, and then it allows them to track it better and keep track of the ones that are out there for public safety and overall for redevelopment.
And I assume there's some standard language or language that we could work with, what defines a vacant, how long is it
Correct.
determined to be vacant, that type of thing. And then, I'm curious as to how, I assume it would come through staff if we observe something, inform them of obviously everyone's held to know what our ordinances are, but if they don't realize that they have to register it as a vacant property, but the zero water usage is a very creative way of catching up to something like that if they're not using water, or they shut off their water or do something like that, they
Right.
become it's vacant, but,
And there's other mechanisms as well that we can certainly explore. One is also looking to see which properties have been registered with the Cook County Assessor as being vacant. But this would allow us, all the ordinances that I've reviewed, and it kind of stems from the Cook County ordinance for that, they all basically state the same thing, which is they define the property, they define the owner, they define the specific steps that need to go through it. So it's a pretty boilerplate ordinance that would just need to be implemented, and the harder part is actually following through with it. But this would be step number 1.
and it applies to commercial and residential?
Yes, it
And are they pretty much the same requirements, same parameters, that type of thing?
It does. Some municipalities only apply it to commercial, and some apply it to both.
Okay.
A building is defined as one that would be either single-family residence, industrial, mixed use, or commercial.
Questions or comments from the board?
A couple questions.
Sure.
Are we talking about one particular thing here or 2? Is this the proposed vacant building ordinance and property registration? Because I think somewhere else it talks about property registration and proposed vacant building ordinance.
They go hand in hand, so the
Okay.
ordinance would allow us to implement the property
But this relates to vacant
registration.
property.
Correct.
Okay. So what happens when a property is going through foreclosure?
That's precisely the ones that fall right underneath that. Those that are in foreclosure, those that are in bankruptcy, those that have simply been left vacant.
Okay, but how do you, who's registering that vacant building?
There's always,
Brian, it's not
Yeah.
your turn to talk.
so there would, it would be either generally it would be the asset manager. So once the foreclosure has been completed, an asset manager by the bank is assigned to the property. So that is someone that you would be able to reach out to. It's essentially the person that takes care of it on behalf of the bank. If it's in court, then it's technically the property owners, the owners. So we would find that through the recorder of deeds, Cook County Assessor's
But how are you
office.
going to get that person or estate to register a vacant property?
If they're in the foreclosure?
I
Well,
mean,
you would look to see, what you would look to see is what's happening in circuit court and how quickly
my point here.
foreclosure will go through.
I'm pretty familiar with a particular case here.
Sure.
You have a person or persons who pass away. The property goes into foreclosure.
Okay.
During that period of time, there's 4 or 5 different banks that take,
Firstly, rights?
right. So are you requiring each of those then to register? I mean, certainly the deceased person isn't going to register.
No, but I can speak directly to that. So for example, if it is an estate, if it's someone's deceased, there's always an estate that it goes to. So that would be, as long as they're the owner of record, it goes to their estate. So there's either an executor or it'd go to the heirs by the laws of the heirship in Illinois. Now, assuming that nobody's around and it does actually go into foreclosure, there's generally 2 lenders, so it'd be the first lien holder that you would wait for. Foreclosures take about 12 to 15 months to complete, so technically, if we played it all the way out, we might have to wait 12 months for the bank to get it. That's all public record. It's in the circuit court, so we can look to see who's the bank and then find out who the asset manager is.
But I guess my point with that is that bank can change throughout that process.
It doesn't really change usually, and if it does, you can certainly find that because that's all public record. So if they
I
assign it
understand,
to
but that's what I'm
another one-
saying, that there's some of these cases are gonna be much easier to deal with than others.
Oh, of course, absolutely. But we have the mechanism and the tools, because most of this is public record. I mean, bottom line, if you have to do a skip trace, but you don't want to have to do that. Right now, what we're doing is we're pulling this information as it is from different resources. This allows us to keep it, squarely with the owner, whether that owner is a trustee in a bankruptcy, a bank that owns it, or whether it's an estate or the actual owner. It's usually not that big of a mystery. It just takes some time to be able to look through it. And like I said, it's not a quick process.
Other questions from the board? Did you have additional slides or more slides or information?
Right,
Okay.
these are just some proposed property registration information that we'd ask for, including who's the registered agent, if it is a company, property maintenance company information, pending litigation, as we just discussed, if it's in bankruptcy, if it's in foreclosure, if it's an estate, any other persons that have legal, equitable, beneficial interests, and that would be for the estate situation. Anyone who's 21 and over that would accept service, that's important for us to know. Recommendations that we have for an annual non-prorated, non-refundable registration fee, a proposed registration fee of $200 for residential and $500 for commercial and multifamily buildings. That would include an interior and exterior inspection within 15 days of the registration, and then an additional $100 if there's extra reinspection fees that need to be done. And then owners have to file an amended registration form if there's any change in the ownership or information. Because what we find ourselves doing now is we're constantly trying to chase and find things, even for the adjudication hearings.
Can you go back to this? So what does the inspection look for, or what's the purpose of the inspection?
Health, safety items mostly.
Okay.
So if things need to be boarded up, cleaned, fire inspection would be included in that, flammable items that need to be removed. The building needs to be secured.
And then they're cited if they don't, and then we follow up
Correct.
that way.
Yes.
And then what's the proof of liability insurance? I mean, is that,
The building, they would have to provide proof that the building is insured, so it's not an uninsured building. So that would be provided as part of it. And depending on if it's residential or commercial, that the limit of that policy is usually $500,000, but it would depend on what we include.
and is that something that we can require? Obviously, we want people to have, and people should have liability insurance, but if they don't have liability insurance, do we have authority to?
That's the requirement, that would be part of the requirement.
Just on vacant properties in general, or is that, I mean,
You mean, can we require it on all properties?
yes.
Well, not under this ordinance, we wouldn't be
Okay.
able. We could have a different ordinance, but not under this one. This one would be specific to vacant properties.
Okay,
I mean, the lenders require anyone who has a mortgage on it.
right,
Has to
no.
have it.
I'm just worried about our ability to enforce and, catch all these things. But I mean, I'd like to hear from the board, is there, support about this going forward? I'd like to see a actual draft ordinance maybe come back with everything in it, if there's a consensus to, consider something like this, have the actual draft ordinance come back maybe on a committee just before we, vote on it, just so if there's any things or changes. And I assume, I feel comfortable that if it's like, I know the county has one and the other, other municipalities.
Yes, if you want to talk through that last slide, then I have a question.
Oh, sure. This is just the additional recommendations that would go with it, which is any registration that has a change in ownership would have to be updated, renews every 12 months. Then this is a key one that not all the villages have, but some of them do. There has to be a vacant building plan statement of intent. That's part of the application, which states what they're planning on doing with the building, and then a formal vacant building plan that would be submitted within 60 days. This is a really key component because it tells us what the owner is planning on doing with the building. If it's a foreclosure, they might be selling it. If it's an estate, they might be selling it, fixing it. It gives us information to work off of. And then registration within 60 days of vacancy, and then a $100 renewal fee.
Is there so what if they give us a plan, you know, for what they plan to do when it changes or they don't comply with that plan, is that a violation of the ordinance if they change their plan or don't follow through with the plan or don't follow the timeline of the plan?
If they change their plan, that wouldn't necessarily be a violation, depending on how it's drafted, but if they don't follow through with it, that would be a violation. And that doesn't foreclose, and that brings me to this one, it doesn't foreclose our ability for additional violations. This is one component of it. So it would allow us to keep all the information in one place versus, you know, chasing all the information. And the fine, the proposed fine would be a minimum of $100, a maximum of $750 per separate offense, which would mirror what's in our adjudication hearings.
Trustee Kalusny?
Thank you for going through that previous slide. I think that having additional information about any vacant property is better than we have
Right.
now. So even if we don't get full compliance for every property, I think it's a step in the direction to help have more information, especially on commercial properties. I think you see things vacant a lot, and we're not sure if someone still is there. Are they not? What are their plans for the future? So having them have to submit a plan makes a lot of sense so that we can figure out how to, you know, occupy those buildings and repopulate some of the commercial spaces.
Yes, that is exactly it.
I have a question about
Yes.
the fees. Can you go back one? I think it's 200 for, so I'm just wondering, is that just purely like for revenue, or is it going to be used for the inspection potentially, or are
It's-
there other purposes for the fees?
Not so much for revenue, but certainly to cover the cost of the inspections. So this was, when I looked at what the other villages were charging, this was kind of an average. Some were, you know, quite higher than that. Only one was a little lower than that for residential. So it's not so much as revenue generating as it's more to cover the cost of the inspection, the manpower, the administration, the follow-up of it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great idea. I just would echo some of Trustee Ketchmark's concerns about people rushing to the door to do all this, and I'm wondering if the fees might
Nobody
be-
will.
Yeah, well, right, so I'm wondering if maybe that's not a barrier at all, but I'm just curious if maybe that's one barrier that may encourage people to do it. Or there are other benefits that might, to the property owner, that might incentivize them to participate.
Sure.
I don't know if there
Well,
are.
if it's a property owner that does register, and for example, they don't have a plan, we can certainly sit down with them and help them. I mean, this is part of the economic development as well. It gives us a benchmark to start from once we do. And I think there will be a number of responsible owners that will come forth and do this because the conclusion of it is an offense that might add up.
Sure. Okay.
I think
I'm a
like,
little-
I'm sorry, go ahead,
sorry.
Trustee Hendricks.
I'm a little concerned about the fees as well. I'm thinking about the example that Trustee Ketchmark gave of an estate, and I'm thinking that in an estate situation, 60 days isn't necessarily a very long time to decide what a family might want to do with those properties. But also, these fees seem like it's an expense, and it's a lot of effort to go through for people who may be leaving buildings behind. And I'm also concerned that I'm not sure why people would jump to do this. And if we're not able to find these properties in order to enforce it, I hesitate to put something in place that doesn't have any teeth.
Sure.
So are we going out then and finding these properties, which is what we want to be not doing?
Well, just to answer that, we have found 75 based on the water usage. That's usually a good indicator. We found 90 simply from going through all the files in adjudication. So they're not unknown. These aren't amorphous properties that are out there. These are ones that already exist. So assuming that it's 90 plus, we have about 100 properties that we already have. The difference is, do we have to proactively go out there versus having something in place? But also to answer your question on the estate, with an estate, there will either be an executor or an administrator. And the plan can be extended. So the plan might be, we're assessing it now, it's in probate, and we're not going to be in front of a judge, for example, for 90 days. We need to extend it. Or it could be the family is assessing it, they're going to sell it within 6 months. That's okay. That's a lot more information than we have right now, which is nothing.
But again, back to the angle of the estates, I'm curious how this works, because yes, there may be the executor, whatever. Doesn't mean there's any money in the estate. Doesn't mean there's any interest in what's sitting in front of them. What's going to be the motivation to spend any money on this for something that, you know, the bank would foreclose on or is in the middle of foreclosing on? I'm familiar with a process that took almost 2 years to foreclose on. And there was zero money in the estate, so the estate's not going to, they're not going to register this. You can come in and look at the property all you want. The estate's not going to do anything to that building or house. That'd be up to the bank to do whatever they're doing.
Right. If there's the bank that's involved, then it might be a case that we wait for it to fully foreclose and that they're outside of that period, and that the bank actually has an auction on it and it forecloses either on it or it's sold to a third party. So that's just a timing game. I mean, most foreclosures now are taking 12 to 15 months, and it certainly has been sped up and refined since the market has crashed. So they're not that fast, and all of this information is public information. So in that case, say it's an estate and there's a mortgage on it and there's nothing left in the property and there's no value to the property. That won't be the case with most commercial properties, just so we're clear on that. But if that is the case, then you wait for the foreclosure process to go through. So we will at least have some information 12 to 15 months from now, which is more than what we would have right going into this. So that's in the estate. However, if it's an estate that has an administrator or an executor or a trustee on it, well, that's part of their fiduciary duty, is not to simply ignore what's there, because they're also going to be named in the foreclosure lawsuit, too. So if this is sent to them, I do anticipate we would receive some type of response to it. And then this stays on there until it's sold.
But again, if you're going to somehow think you're going to force that estate to register this, and then you can hit them with these fines of $107, $150 a day, there's no money in the estate. I mean, are we spending time on something that it's never going to come to fruition? Or like you said, do you wait till ultimately it changes hand or is sold or whatever? But in that short term, you know, I don't see how you're going to get compliance on that.
Well, that would be more of a case-by-case basis, but the estate, what might actually be in the estate is the property itself that has a value to it. Any of them that don't have any mortgage associated with it, and there's some that don't, that you can look up on the recorders, on the Cook County Clerk's website, that is the asset. So the estate has an asset within it. It doesn't have to be a huge estate, but certainly that would also be something that a judge in probate would be able to determine. So I don't think we're going to be chasing, and certainly the other municipalities don't, we're not chasing properties that have no value. We're trying to get information up front to have a metric for data tracking within it. And if there's the one-off that's an estate or a bankruptcy or a foreclosure, those are all manageable.
And I think there'll be a learning curve like everything else, but the alternative, if there's an estate that the executor doesn't want to do and they have no interest in the property, I mean, the alternative is it could sit vacant for 2 years and we have no mechanism for penalizing them, enforcing them, other than the regular code sections, and this, I think, is just an additional tool. So I'm curious, I'd like to see like a full format ordinance on this, and you know, I think you've given us some information about what's happened in the county and other areas, and then, you know, the board can kind of decide from there. I know it's not going to solve all our problems, it's not going to cover every case, and I think I know you're acknowledging that, and it'll be a case-by-case basis, but I'm glad to see it coming forward, because we're all familiar, we could probably list some of these off the top of our head, and sometimes the owners just need a additional push or a financial incentive to, you know, do something to move forward. Sometimes you get in over your head and you're just sitting on it and sitting on it. We've seen this go by for years. Maybe this might force them to take action faster. And as we all know, that, Libby did a really good job at the beginning listing the possible benefits of this, but, there are safety issues here. We're familiar with these buildings being vacant and empty, and who knows what's in them, and then our fire department has to go in there, or if there's a fire or something, or the roof collapses, we need to I'd like to see something come forward in terms of draft ordinance that we talk about one more time, so. So is there a consensus on the board for that?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Libby. Okay, the next item we have up for discussion is a potential amendment to the private lead water service line reimbursement policy. As we came up with, when we created this policy, this is all kind of groundbreaking territory for us in terms of the lead service replacement program that we had to create. At the time, we created the policy with the, expectations of how things would go, and some things have changed, or staff's encountered new scenarios that's led to this discussion tonight. So we have a very detailed memo, but I'm going to, Steve, you take the lead on this to explain kind of how we got to this point, and what staff's recommendations are.
Absolutely. Thank you and good evening, Board. Item up for discussion, as President Garvey has mentioned, is concerning our lead service line replacement fund, specifically the elective private line replacement reimbursement component of that funding policy. In walking through our presentation this evening, there are a few different components that we just want to provide some more detail and support information on. Our agenda for tonight will include background of the lead water replacement state mandate requirements, the funding mechanism the board has implemented and authorized in order to fund the replacements, a 2024 lead water service replacement project update for what we have upcoming as of today, elected private line process and policy, so a look at kind of the internal process in which we enact and process those reimbursements. Some issues that staff have encountered through the reimbursement policy, board options in either amending, discontinuing, or status quo, and advantages and disadvantages within each of those options. I apologize, this is a little smaller than intended, so difficult to read, but this information is in your board packet and the memo provided. Some background to the lead service line replacement project. This is a state mandated requirement, unfunded to all municipalities in the state of Illinois. It was signed by the governor in 2022 and requires that all lead service lines be replaced in Illinois over a 17-year period. This would require compliance by 2044. Would like to note the village is in full compliance and has proactively identified funding, procured IEPA no interest loans for 2024, and is on the intended fund list for 2025. I believe we have the second largest allocation from IEPA as far as no interest loan funding in the state of Illinois. So we have, as a village, been very proactive in addressing this state mandate. In August of 2023, amendments were approved to the lead service line replacement fund to include private line reimbursement. So there was a small component to that replacement fund that did allow for residents to replace their private service line and apply for full reimbursement from the village. Between that time of amendment through January 2024, we did begin that capital improvement project in private and public service line replacement. Bid out that project. Unique Plumbing was the awarded contractor, and they did replace 44 lines that were identified. Many, if not all of those, were leaking lead services, which is why they were identified for immediate replacement. Between August, again, when that fund was implemented through to date, we have issued 9 reimbursements to homeowners electively replacing their private lines. This has totaled about $78,000, and there are 4 current pending inquiries for the reimbursement process in the amount based off of the quotes submitted of about $51,000. Also to note, from the time of board approval of the lead service line replacement fund. All homeowners who are able to be identified after the water rate modification have received reimbursement funding, which was a clear intent of implementing this from the start of the program. With water rate modification, we wanted to ensure that homeowners who had electively replaced in that transition period did receive their reimbursements. So all known homeowners to date. This visual it does provide you a look at the infrastructure of our water main and service lines. Kind of allows you to see underground what our contractors, public works team need to do in order to, one, verify the material of the service lines. Identification of the service line starts at that B-box shutoff valve location, and it does require hydro-excavating down to identify material on both sides in order for 100% accuracy, or as close to 100% accuracy as you can get. You can see those lines do run off of the village water mains. This is the public side to that B-box, and the private side is the B-box to the water meter inside of the homes.
That's all wrong. You did everything wrong.
Do not say another word.
I'm just saying. you did
There's,
everything
don't
wrong.
say another word. There's
It's a
public
sewer.
comment.
Put it right on top of the sewer. It's illegal.
Brian,
And it's all wrong.
Brian, you're better than this.
Give me a break. Give me a break.
Brian, if you can't control yourself, leave. You're better than this.
You know, do your job right.
In the funding mechanism identified as that part of that lead service line replacement fund, our Director of Finance has provided the charge per 1,000 gallons and how that fund is broken down. You can see that the lead water service replacement program specifically is at $1.66 per 1,000 gallons. This fund accrues about $750,000 annually. The village has received $7.55 million in no interest loan funding from the IEPA for 2024. Debt obligation tied to the $7.5 million is between $250,000 and $300,000 annually. We are on the intended funding list for 2025, again from the IEPA and no interest loan funding, in the amount of $10 million. So that's an increased debt obligation between $347,000 to $400,000 annually, and that is in addition to the $250,000 to $300,000 for this year's loan funding award. Within 3 years, at $750,000 annually, and including our debt obligation, that fund will be at 75% of its max income annually, specifically to make up for the debt obligation and construction components. This is a look at our 2024 lead water service replacement projects. It is a very large undertaking. It was bid out in 3 phases, phases 1, 2, and 3, but each of those phases totals 690 lines for replacement, which is approximately 23% of our identified lead service lines in the village. And that is based off of the current data and estimated 3,056 total lines, lead lines. And this information was taken during our lead water service collection report. The board remembers identification of material for this survey was done at the same time we were replacing MTUs on meters. So that is where a large majority of
Mrs.
that
Dufek, do you
data
need a
was
hand
collected.
getting up? You're sure? I know you're, go home and put that foot up. Sorry.
Wanted to give the board a closer look at that project map. It does highlight all of the areas within the village in which lead service lines are being replaced. Again, 690 total. You can see in yellow are the phase 1 project areas. If they are boxed in red, The services are located on 2024 Street. Improvement project areas, which is the highest priority. In blue is Phase 2 of those areas, and in pink is Phase 3. So being able to, through IEPA loan funding and the water rate modification for that service fund, is allowing us to replace approximately 23% of our services in year one alone. The elective private line replacement process. So again, within that fund, we had a component to allow residents to electively replace their private lines and receive reimbursement. At first implementation, this was an entirely new program to the village. In first implementation, we required some support documents with the application. First is to include a letter from the homeowner to include name, address, contact information, and description of work. They are required to provide an itemized quote from the contractor, proof of permitting, proof of payment, and a copy of past inspection. The village does not reimburse for upgrades and lines required by code or new construction. We also do not reimburse for new meter installation or material, as well as any interior restoration, not to include the concrete closest to the water meter. So if flooring or drywall had to be breached, for example, we would not reimburse for the cost of new drywall or flooring. Within the 9 reimbursements that we've processed to date, again totaling around 78,000, we've started to identify some concerns with this program. The primary concerns are highlighted here. Initially, it is the high contractor quotes we're seeing, and that is most recently. We did not see the high contractor quotes at the beginning of this program, and now that private contractors are realizing the village has a reimbursement program, we are getting residents calling an inquiry to let them know a plumber or their plumber contacted them to let them know they should do this now because the village will pay 100% of it. So we're seeing quotes ranging from 8,000, which is a little more typical, all the way up through 18,000 recently for line replacement. The other component of concern is that in these private line replacements, we are mandated by state law to replace the public side if that side is determined to be lead as well. So if you touch either side of that line, public or private, you need to do a full replacement. The unknown and public side material verification does require hydro-excavating down at the B-box. It is the only true way to, as close to 100% accuracy, identify the line material. That does take staff coordination, that does take staff costs, and some of these 9 replacements that we've reimbursed for, we've been notified after the line has already been replaced, which requires us to go back in to do a public side replacement if determined lead. The third concern and most recent concern is the coordination of these elected replacements outside of the 690 lines that Public Works and Hancock Engineering is coordinating in our capital improvement project. Having to coordinate elective replacements outside of this large capital improvement project does take some time. Can create some prolonged frustration for a private resident if they want to move forward with an elected replacement. We do need to project manage that, pull staff from project schedules to hydro-excavate, determine public material, and that can create some delays. Additionally, depending on at what stage they notify the village of their replacement, it may require us contracting their procured contractor at a higher rate, as we would be unable to use 5 Star Energy, for example, who are already on procured low bid rates for the 690 lines. They may or may not be able to get pulled to add these to their project areas. This is a look at our surrounding communities policies. regarding if they have a lead line replacement policy in general, the funding mechanism, and if they have elected private line replacement. I'm gonna blow this up a little bit for you. This is provided in your board packet, but we looked at the communities of LaGrange Park, LaGrange, North Riverside, Riverside, Westchester, and Western Springs, all in our immediate surrounding area. Large takeaway from that is Brookfield is the only community allowing elected private line replacement at all, and then ours is with 100% reimbursement. The only community that had indicated they would potentially be looking at elected private line is Western Springs. They currently have a overhead sewer cost share program similar to our flood mitigation program, where they do cap that in both numbers allowed and cost share to that program. So all other surrounding communities do not have a program in place, and from discussions with those communities, do not intend to allow private line replacement outside of their capital improvement areas.
Stevie, before you go on,
Yep, absolutely.
they do not allow that, or they do not reimburse it?
They do not allow for it, and the only community that is considering reimbursement is Western Springs, but that will have a cost share maximum.
But they couldn't even do it on their own dime?
For reimbursement.
Okay, for reimbursement.
They allow them to
Any
be-
private.
Right, they allow it,
correct.
but they wouldn't be reimbursed. Okay,
Yep, I
fine.
apologize.
And just to follow up on that point, so if these other municipalities where a homeowner elects to do it on their own and pay for it themselves, but that does generate or require then the village to check the village's side of it and then possibly replace it themselves by the federal requirement, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So
How do
right
they
now
deal,
they-
how do they deal with, I mean, I guess they just, I mean, if they get notified that a private homeowner is making a decision to pay for it themselves, then the village has to then check and replace.
Right. The village of LaGrange, they have a particular ordinance where the private line is the responsibility of the resident. So even if it is tied to a capital improvement area, the resident is still responsible for 100% of costs of private line replacement, as an example. An additional takeaway from this, and this is a kudos to the village, board, engineer, and public works, is in speaking and taking a look at what other surrounding communities are doing, Brookfield is head and shoulders above where a lot of these communities are at. They are still in the discussion phase of funding mechanism and policy for lead service replacement.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? So if they elect and pay for their private service, is the village then on the hook for the public side? Right?
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And is that within a
Also
certain
impact.
amount of time?
Yeah.
within 30 days, the
Right.
public side needs to be replaced.
But the bottom line is if the residents are paying 100%, the number that are going to be replaced is gonna go down because it wouldn't be the burden that there'd be on the public side. If right now we're paying 100%, more residents are gonna say, we'll do it because you're gonna pay for
Right.
it. So the number is gonna be higher, but if they're paying 100%, the number's gonna go down.
But just to be clear, the village would, even if they elected to pay 100% of the private side, the village would still be on,
Within 30 days of.
within 30 days. Thank you.
They're still navigating that, so there are private line elected replacements that if gone uncaught or checked, the public side is not being replaced, and it's had to have been addressed after the fact.
Okay, I'll let you keep going.
There are some options in this program. One, to include remaining status quo, no change to the existing policy. Requiring multiple quotes from residents seeking elected replacement and reimbursement. Allowing the village to select the ultimate vendor for work based off of confirmation and being a registered contract with the village and pricing evaluation. Establishing a maximum cap cost share for elected replacements, 50% cost share up to $4,000 reimbursed as an example. 8,000 is a consistent reasonable price we're kind of seeing with one-off replacements. updating the process to include public works staff being deployed at the time of inquiry and before any work is done to confirm public line material. With that, 5 and 6 kind of go hand in hand, requiring a fee to the homeowner if public works must confirm public material type for an elective replacement. That means not to include capital project areas or street improvement areas, or to discontinue the elective private line replacement reimbursement policy. These are options identified, but they are not limited if there is additional discussion or recommendation in moving forward. Within each of these options, we have identified some advantages and disadvantages. Clearly, option 1, continuing the program as is, will not address the concerns that we've discussed in the previous slides, including solicitation of the program by private vendors, high contractor prices, public side material verification, and the coordination of elective replacements while managing the 690 lines in 2024. Options 2 and 3 include requiring multiple quotes from the homeowner, as well as village selection of the ultimate vendor. Requiring multiple quotes within any program does create a more fiscally responsible environment, but it also does not procure the selected vendor. So while we can require a homeowner to provide 3 quotes, it doesn't mean that they need to choose the lowest quote. They can still elect to move forward with a higher quote for whatever reason. Allowance of the village to select the vendor for private line work would need to be reviewed by the village attorney to ensure that it's in compliance with any of our ordinances or what we are allowed by law. Establishing a maximum cap cost share, again, 50% or up to 4,000 was used as an example, and that was for kind of the lowest, most consistent, reasonable quotes we've seen come across. Similar to option 2, it does create a more fiscally responsible environment for the program. However, it does not address the unknown number of requests we will receive annually. It does not address the coordination of public side material verification or project management as it relates to our current capital improvement project areas. So that one does have the most fiscally responsible environment. However, there are still some unknowns left, which remain concerns for staff. Options 5 and 6 are specific to the management and what it takes for material line verification. Updating the process to include required line verification prior to any work done. Also would require a fee to the homeowner potentially if they must be deployed to confirm material type. Including material verification at the time of inquiry will prolong the process for the elective line replacement. We have seen that scenario. It is within your board packet. Frustration for a resident to prolong their replacement project. Their yard is torn up. They have no water potentially, depending on what stage they're in, and waiting for our public works team or our contractor to come on site. Requiring a fee associated with line verification may mitigate any change of hearts on pursuing replacements. So that is to say, if a homeowner wants to inquire about the reimbursement program, we would deploy a public works team, letting them know there is a fee associated with that. Because what we are seeing as well is there are residents who make an inquiry, we provide them all the information, there's some Q&A back and forth, and they decide that they do not want to do an elective replacement. However, that is staff time and material verification time to Public Works. Some of the data tied to the previous slide and deployment of Public Works for material line verification. Vince Smith, our Public Works Director, has provided kind of the cost breakdown of what material line verification is as it relates to labor and material. And total is about $225 of village staff time and material to verify public or private lines in the hydro excavation. Option 7 is ultimately staff's recommendation, and that is the discontinuance of the elective private line replacement reimbursement policy. There are reasons for that. I have provided them previously in our presentation as well as in your board packet, but discontinuing the elective private line replacements does allow our public works team to efficiently manage with our engineering and Five Star Energy firms to efficiently manage the capital improvement areas already identified this year. 690 lines is specific to lead services. We also have water main project replacement, street improvement project areas, and they are spread very thin with what we have going on in capital improvement this year. It is fiscally responsible in that it gives more control and stability of that lead line replacement fund moving forward. Again, we have some unknowns by allowing the program to continue. We don't know how many reimbursement requests we will receive. We don't know the range of the quotes that are associated with each of those lines. And there's no way to tell if there is a public side replacement tied to that elective private line with each of those requests. To note, we are currently very proactive in approaching replacements of these lines. While the state mandates this to be completed in a 17-year period, going at this rate, and most especially because we are in the intended funding list for next year, we may have all lead water services replaced within 5 years. And I will leave you to any additional questions.
Thank you, Stevie. Just by way of further background to the board, when staff approached me about this, this scenario, I'll admit I was concerned about, the elimination of the reimbursement policy, but this was one of those things that, the board with their best intentions created the policy back with the information that we had, but I didn't see, and I don't think staff saw, and if anyone else saw it, that this was going to become a, let's just say industrious contractors seeing a chance to, they know the village has this program. I mean, when you hear about $18,000 lead service replacements, an outrageous price, I guess I didn't anticipate that happening. But I'll like to remind the board, at the time we created this, there was concern, the lead line came out, and we had talked about, some people might be anxious to get it done or feel the need to get it done. But as Stevie pointed out, the state mandate was, that you had replaced these over a 17-year period, I think beginning in 2027. We've started before everyone else. So at the time we started this plan, we were looking at the mandate that we had to replace them over a 17-year period, and we didn't have to start till 2027. And to the staff and board's credit, we started earlier. We started very early, got on top of it. And as Stevie indicated, and originally when we created this policy, I think we anticipated the rough estimate was about 5,500 lines might have to be replaced, and I think we've revised that down to about 3,200 lines. And with the almost 700 that we've done, I guess the point is maybe that we don't need this. People that want to get their lines replaced faster, I think there's some scenario where we thought people might have to wait 17 years to get their lines replaced, and that they might choose to do that earlier if they wanted to, and that maybe we should come up with a reimbursement plan. But seeing where we're at and how we've progressed on the fiscal responsibility, I supported bringing this forward, and I supported staff's recommendation. I support staff's recommendation that we eliminate the reimbursement policy based on the fact that we're likely to have all these done in 5 or 6 years, and they can go out and do it on their own if they want, but it won't be reimbursed. So I just want to explain to the board how this kind of came forward for discussion today. So I'll open it up to discussion from the board.
I have a question, Derek, Vince. With that 5-year plan, or even if it could possibly be 6 or 7, depending on how funding comes through, is I feel like you show us lots of cool maps. Is there a map that could show people when theirs is planning to be replaced over the next 5 years so that people could, similar to the other GIS things that we have, they could see, oh, I'm scheduled for 2026. And then if they wanted to elect to do that and pay the full amount prior to that, they can choose to do that, but at least they know where they are on the next 5 to 7 year schedule.
We could provide a map based on the funding that we are aware that we're gonna get. So we have the map that shows what we're doing this year.
Right.
We're on a draft intended funding list for $10 million this year, much more than we anticipated. Once that list comes out this week or next week, we can then program where that'll go. It would be hard to tell people where we're going in the future because we don't know if we'll continue to get the $10 million grants. So, but yes, we can put a map together. We're basically, what we've done on this map, all those areas represent planned capital improvement projects, trying to get the services done ahead of time. So that's part of how we'll prioritize the $10 million. So we can get a map. I don't know that we can go all out for the remainder of the program though.
Thanks.
But Derek, even with that, so we have the funding mechanism in place with the water rate increase, and at the rate we're going and the rates we've gotten, and with the, at least the zero interest loan we've had so far, I mean, even under the worst case scenario, I mean, we're not looking at 17 years out to complete.
No, I wouldn't think so. I had a talk last week with the IEPA project manager to check on the 10 million. Do you think that's coming? Yes. And she said, we love communities like you because if you can spend all your money. So I'm anticipating we might get similar large amounts like that. And as Stevie said, be able to wrap this up in 5 years, maybe even less. If we get 10 million, we can wrap this up in 3 more years. We just can't guarantee that funding, but the EPA seems willing to provide that funding to us if we keep taking advantage.
And I realize you're trying to be very careful, as you should, but I mean, if that funding, like, we seem pretty good for next year, but if the funding dries up after that, even we could still continue without that funding based on the water rate increases we've had, and we'd have so much done that, I guess what I'm saying, we don't get pushed to 15, 17 years if that funding dries up.
No, I can't anticipate that
Okay.
happening.
Okay.
No, but if loan funding does dry up, let's say in year 3, we're not allocated anything, that was a component of this. Discontinuing elective replacements provides a more stable environment and
Right.
known funding.
Other questions, comments from the board?
Yeah, I'm curious about I think the exceptions for emergencies and leaking pipes. So how does that work? Is the homeowner, I mean, obviously the ones that the village catches you take care of, and I know that's happened in the past, but if the homeowner identifies a leak, is there a process internally to contact the village and get the replacement done?
Correct. We do annually now provide 2 leak detection services that does cover the full village, so twice a year. Within that, if there are any leaking lines identified, the replacement does come out of this fund. It's not on the responsibility of the homeowner to do the replacement. So we've expended about $217,000 from that fund. About $78,000 is for elected replacements, and the remaining amount is for public side replacement and any leaking lines identified since August of '23. So moving forward, if a homeowner calls Public Works and says, hey, my water pressure isn't really, what it should be, can you come out and check? Public Works does deploy, confirm any leaks, and the village does replace that.
Okay. And that's if the leak is on the private side as well?
Correct.
Okay. Otherwise, no, I mean, I think I support the village's recommendation on this. I think, I think people are concerned about lead service lines, and I think the efforts you all have taken to get out ahead of it and try to finish this
in a reasonable time. Hopefully, if we can maybe have an education campaign or talk about the lead testing or the water testing that the village does do, I think that would be really helpful to alleviate any concerns with removing this program.
I'd like to say that I support staff's recommendation as well, and I say that as a person who has a lead service line running to my home, and we're likely to be one of the last ones replaced based on the age of our street. I am confident that this is the most responsible and efficient use of public dollars, is discontinuing this plan.
Yeah, to add on to Trustee Hendricks there, as President Garvey has pointed out on many occasions, we are the stewards of the taxpayer money, and we must be, show fiscal responsibility, and allowing the advantages being taken on the elected replacements is something that we must stop if we are gonna be stewards of the public money. So I think I'm totally in favor of stopping it.
Well, and the fact is, every lead service line in the village is going to be replaced, and
Yeah.
that this doesn't change that.
Right.
I agree, and to Trustee Nermasu's point, doing some education around it, so that people are aware of of our timeline and that it is faster than the mandated timeline. When to expect that, if and when we do have maps, that it becomes part of that kind of story maps or construction process piece of the puzzle, and that we're advertising that. I think it's just being public about it.
I support staff recommendation.
And like I said, as when we created this policy, I think the board, I still say that I think the board did the right thing with the information we had and thinking it could be 17 years and we might have 5,500 and realize there may be some homeowners and, but with the, our job is to adapt and change as we see the scenarios. And like I said, I don't know if anyone saw the fact that these contractors were going to take advantage of this situation. And, I'm not going to ask staff to, kind of give the numbers, but how many of these elective service replacements were based on the homeowner's true concern, or was it the cold calls from the plumbing companies that led to it happening? So, there's draft language for the proposed policy. If we could put this up at the next meeting to, have the board address it and vote on it at the next meeting, and then, there's the pending ones and everything else that staff can resolve, but I think the sooner we clarify this policy and get it out there and let the plumbing contractors know what the policy is, so they stop the cold calls, and the bids will be better for it, and we'll just keep moving along, so.
Could I ask a question? If we do implement option 7 here and discontinue the policy, and people still come forward asking for elective replacements, it may make sense to also implement 5 and 6, so that those elective replacements, we would still have a way to cover the cost of the staff time to find out if the public side is also lead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so elective replacement will require a verification fee if the public side is owned, or to determine. In addition, they will not be reimbursed for their elective
I
replacement.
think that would be reasonable.
President, if I could just make a couple of comments. I want to commend Stevie and Vince and village staff. There's a lot of balls that have to be kept in the air to administer this program. As you correctly noted, we're in uncharted territory here. We started this. We are been very proactive, and the board has been very proactive at attacking this well beyond and before our neighboring communities have done this. Particularly, I want to commend the village engineer. Derek Trigal spends an inordinate amount of time massaging his relationships with the IEPA and so forth, and getting these no-interest loans. We throw around low interest. These aren't low interest loans. These are zero interest loans, and we've gotten 10 or 11, $12 million in basically free money in terms of having to pay interest on that. And that's Derek's proactivity, phone calls, meetings, and so forth, and setting us up and aligning this up in order for us to be able to take advantage of this. So terrific work on his part and everybody's part.
I agree, and thank you, Derek. And thank you, staff, because I mean, I know what's happening in other towns. Other towns are having the conversation that we had a year and a half, 2 years ago. We had the conversation and staff came forward with a, framework for a plan and the board had input on it, but as, we said at the time, it's not something that's going to go away or change, so the board took it head on and we're better for it. We're getting the lead service replaced faster at better prices and, we're going to be done because staff brought it forward and the board made the decisions at the time. So thank you to everybody, and we'll put this up at the July 22nd meeting. Okay, that ends the items we have under regular business. I once again will open up to public comments. Is there any public comment on this side? Any public comment on this side? Hearing none, there's no need for executive session tonight, so at 8:08, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
So moved.
Second.
The motion was made by trustee Ketchmark, second by trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Nearmatudu?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned at 8:08 PM. Thank you for coming.